I'm Elizabeth Davis Hanson, and what I'm about to tell you represents something far more consequential than the closing of a single restaurant. We're witnessing the systematic dismantling of an entire industry, and it's happening in real time across California. This isn't speculation. This isn't political rhetoric. These are documented facts that reveal how well-intentioned policy collides with economic reality, and the collision always produces casualties. Let me begin with a story that encapsulates everything wrong with how we approach economic policy in this country. A franchisee operated a McDonald's location inside the Stonestown Galleria in San Francisco for 30 years. 3 decades. Think about what that means. This wasn't some corporate entity making cold calculations in a distant boardroom. This was a man who built something, who employed people, who served his community for an entire generation. In June of last year, he posted a notice on the door. The restaurant was closing permanently. His explanation was careful, measured, corporate in its language, but the meaning was unmistakable. He wrote about unprecedented changes to California's economic landscape and ill-timed legislative mandates that had narrowed his path forward. Strip away the diplomatic phrasing and you get the raw truth. He could no longer make money operating that restaurant. This operator, Scott Roderick, described the decision as gut-wrenching for his family, and he should know something about the restaurant business. He doesn't just own that one location. He operates 18 McDonald's restaurants across California. This is a man who understands the industry, who has successfully navigated decades of changing consumer preferences, economic downturns, and competitive pressures. Yet he looked at the current situation and determined that one of his locations simply could not survive. When experienced operators with deep knowledge of their business start closing profitable locations, you need to pay attention to what they're telling you. Now, Scott Roderick is not alone in this, not even close. In the span of just 18 months, California's fast food industry has hemorrhaged somewhere between 10,000 and 23,000 jobs. The exact number depends on which economic study you consult, but the range itself tells you something important. Even at the low end of these estimates, we're talking about the displacement of 10,000 workers. At the high end, nearly 23,000. These aren't abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. These are individuals who woke up one morning with employment and went to bed that night without it. These are people with rent to pay, families to feed, and futures that suddenly became uncertain. Before the new wage law even took effect, Pizza Hut franchises across California made a calculated decision. They looked ahead at what was coming and determined they could not sustain their delivery operations. So they eliminated 1,200 delivery driver positions. Gone, just like that. One driver who had worked for Pizza Hut for 9 years received $400 in severance. Let me repeat that so it sinks in. 9 years of service, $400. That works out to about $44 per year of loyalty. After these layoffs, customers who wanted pizza delivered had to use third-party services like DoorDash or Uber Eats. Pizza Hut essentially outsourced the problem and moved on. But Pizza Hut represents just one company's response to changing economic conditions. The broader impact touches over 500,000 fast food workers across California. 500,000 people. That's larger than the entire population of Sacramento. Every single one of these workers saw something change in their employment situation. Some lost their jobs entirely. Others kept their positions but saw their hours slashed. Still, others watched as their wages increased on paper while their actual take-home pay decreased because they were working fewer shifts. This is the reality that doesn't fit neatly into political talking points about raising wages and helping workers. So what actually triggered all of this? On April 1st of last year, California implemented a new minimum wage specifically for fast food workers. The wage jumped from $16 per hour to $20 per hour. That's a 25% increase overnight. And it applied to workers at chain restaurants with 60 or more locations nationwide. We're talking about roughly 30,000 restaurants employing more than 500,000 people. The scale of this policy change cannot be overstated. $20 an hour sounds substantial. If you work full-time, that comes to $41,600 annually before taxes. For many workers, that represents a meaningful increase in their hourly rate. But here's where we need to look at what the actual research tells us about what happened after this policy went into effect. The National Bureau of Economic Research published a study in July. These aren't political operatives or think tank ideologues. These are serious academic economists from the University of California, San Diego, and Texas A&M. Their methodology was rigorous. Their findings were clear. California's fast food sector lost approximately 18,000 jobs compared to what would have occurred without the wage increase. Employment in the sector declined by 2.7% relative to the rest of the country. While fast food jobs were expanding in other states, California was contracting. Another economist, Christopher Thornburg, who runs Beacon Economics, examined the same phenomenon and arrived at an even higher estimate. He calculated that 23,100 jobs disappeared in the past year. The California Employment Development Department, which is a state agency with access to comprehensive employment data, revised its own estimates and concluded that limited-service restaurants experienced a reduction of 21,500 jobs. These aren't fringe estimates. These are mainstream economic analyses, all pointing in the same direction. Now here's where this story takes a turn that I find particularly revealing. A third study came from the Berkeley Research Group. This research was funded by the same union that had pushed for the $20 minimum wage in the first place. Think about the incentives at play here. The union had every reason to want data showing that the wage increase had positive effects, or at least neutral effects. Yet even this union-funded study had to acknowledge that 10,700 jobs were lost. They described it as the steepest decline this century outside of the Great Recession and the pandemic. When the advocates for a policy have to admit that their preferred policy produced job losses, you know the evidence is overwhelming. 3 different studies, 3 different methodologies, 3 different numbers, but all 3 point to the same fundamental conclusion. Jobs disappeared. Real people lost real employment. And this isn't some theoretical debate about economic models. This is observable, measurable, documented reality. What makes this situation even more striking is that the job losses began before the law took effect. Pizza Hut franchises looked at the calendar in December of the previous year, calculated what the new wage law would cost them, and made their decisions. They filed official notices announcing the elimination of all delivery driver positions. Every single one. Pack Pizza and Southern California Pizza Company together cut over 1,200 jobs across Orange, Los Angeles, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura counties. Another 800 workers lost their positions in Sacramento, Central California, and the Reno-Tahoe area. One of these drivers, a man who had spent 9 years delivering pizzas for the company, spoke to a reporter. He had been offered that $400 severance package I mentioned earlier. $400 to walk away from 9 years of employment. He had built his life around that job, structured his finances around that income, and suddenly it was gone. Not because he performed poorly, not because the company was failing, but because the economics of employing him at the new wage didn't work anymore. After the layoffs, Pizza Hut's solution was to tell customers they could use app-based delivery services if they wanted pizza brought to their homes. The company no longer considered delivery to be their problem. They had effectively decided that maintaining an in-house delivery fleet was incompatible with the new cost structure they faced. So they eliminated that entire function of their business. Customers adapted. Some used the apps, others started picking up their own pizzas, and 1,200 former employees had to figure out what came next in their working lives. This pattern of closures, layoffs, and restructuring represents just the beginning of what I'm seeing across California. The law of unintended consequences doesn't care about your good intentions. It doesn't matter how much you want to help workers if the policies you implement make it economically impossible to employ those workers in the first place. And what we're witnessing in California right now is a case study in how economic theory meets economic reality, and reality wins every single time. Let me tell you about a company that should have been a California success story. Rubio's Coastal Grill invented the fish taco. This wasn't some corporate myth created by marketing departments. They actually did it. Started in San Diego back in 1983, and at their peak, they operated nearly 200 restaurants. These were the people who brought Baja-style fish tacos to American consumers. They built something real, something popular, something that seemed sustainable. On May 31st of last year, Rubio's closed 48 California locations in a single day, 13 in San Diego, 24 in the Los Angeles area, 11 in Northern California. Employees showed up for their shifts and discovered they no longer had jobs. 5 days later, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy with over $1 billion in debt and less than $30 million in cash on hand. And here's what should concern anyone paying attention to California's economic trajectory. This was their second bankruptcy in 4 years. The first one hadn't fixed anything. It had merely postponed the inevitable. The company's chief restructuring officer provided the official explanation. He cited diminishing in-store traffic attributable to work-from-home practices, rising food and utility costs, and significant increases to the minimum wage in California. These factors, he said, put pressure on a number of locations. Translation from corporate language into plain English: people stopped coming in, costs went up, and the fundamental mathematics of operating these restaurants stopped working. By August, Rubio's got sold to its lenders for approximately $40 million. Private equity firm Mill Road Capital had purchased the company in 2010 for $91 million. In 14 years, the company lost more than half its value. That's not a restructuring. That's a fire sale. Now let me give you some specific numbers from operators on the ground. Alex Johnson operates 10 fast food locations in California. He estimated the wage increase would cost his restaurants $470,000 total, nearly $500,000 in additional labor costs for one operator with 10 locations. Scott Roderick, the same franchisee who closed that San Francisco McDonald's, owns 18 locations across the state. He raised prices 5 to 7% in just 3 months. And here's what tells you how desperate the situation had become. He started postponing capital expenses. Things like updating dining rooms, buying new grills, replacing rooftop HVAC systems. When you're choosing between fixing your equipment and paying your workers, something fundamental has broken in your business model. There's a closure that illustrates this crisis better than any statistic possibly could. Foster's Freeze in Lemoore, California. Small town, about 3 hours north of Los Angeles. The owner, Lauren Wright, had been running this location for years. On April 1st of last year, the exact same day the $20 minimum wage kicked in, he closed the doors permanently. Some employees thought it was an April Fool's joke. They received a text in their group chat saying the store was shutting down and they didn't believe it. The owner texted a local reporter that the last thing he ever wanted was to close down. By Friday night, he knew he likely couldn't keep the store open, but he didn't want to ruin their Easter Sunday. The assistant general manager found out when two of her coworkers showed up to clock in. That's when she received a phone call saying they were done. This manager, Monica Navarro, said something that should be taught in every economics class in America. She said the people she spoke to, her employees, would have rather stayed at the wage they had before because now they don't have a job. Let that statement settle in your mind. The workers themselves, the supposed beneficiaries of this wage increase, said they would rather make $16 an hour than $0 an hour. This is what happens when policy is divorced from reality. But Monica pointed out something else that nobody wants to discuss in polite political conversation. Those who still work in areas where wages went up to $20 an hour had their hours severely cut, and far fewer people are working each shift. So the jobs became much more difficult. The Competitive Enterprise Institute found that 89% of California fast food workers have had their hours reduced since the wage increase. 89%, and 35% lost supplemental benefits on top of that. You might be making $20 an hour, but if you only get 20 hours a week instead of 35, you're actually taking home less money than before. Edgar Ramos works at a Wingstop in Los Angeles. His pay jumped from $17.25 to $20 in April. Sounds like progress, doesn't it? But now he only works about 20 hours a week. He told a reporter he fights to get more time on the schedule. He asked a question that cuts to the heart of this entire issue. He said it makes no sense because if you're cutting hours for your current workers, why are you hiring new people and blaming the increase of the wage? That's the mathematics that advocates for these policies refuse to acknowledge. Now let's talk about what happened to prices. McDonald's chief executive stated plainly on an earnings call that there would be a wage impact for California franchises, and certainly there would be some element of that which needed to be worked through with higher pricing. No ambiguity there. You, the customer, are paying for the wage increase. California restaurant prices increased 14.5% between September of 2023 and December of last year. The national average during the same period was only 8.2%. California prices jumped nearly double the national rate. Chipotle's chief executive said simply that the state is not making it easy. Chipotle raised prices 6 to 7% in California in the first week of April alone. But here's what should concern you about McDonald's specifically. According to financial analysis, McDonald's menu prices have increased 100% since 2014. They've doubled. A McChicken sandwich went from $1 to $2.99. A quarter pounder with cheese meal went from $5.39 to nearly $12. McDonald's president admitted that menu prices are up about 40% since 2019 alone. The chief executive also admitted that customers making less than $45,000 a year have stopped ordering from McDonald's. He said eating at home has become more affordable and that the battleground is certainly with that low-income consumer. When McDonald's, the company built entirely on affordable fast food, admits that eating at home is cheaper than its restaurants, something has fundamentally shifted in American economic life. Not everyone is failing under these conditions. Two sisters own 21 McDonald's restaurants across Los Angeles County. They own every single McDonald's in the city of Compton and employ over 1,400 people. Their family has been in the McDonald's business since 1984. They're still operating, still employing people, still growing. Same state, same wage laws, same economic pressures, different outcomes. When asked about the wage increase, one of the sisters said, "You cannot raise prices enough to cover the costs." But she's adapting. She put a supervisor in charge of going to every restaurant and doing food cost analysis. Are they giving out too many ketchup packets? Are they putting too many squirts of sauce on the Big Mac? That's what survival looks like now. Counting ketchup packets to stay in business. The pattern is clear. Higher costs lead to higher prices, which lead to fewer hours and fewer jobs. And for some businesses, close doors forever. California's fast food industry isn't dead. McDonald's still has over 1,400 locations in the state. But the industry is transforming in ways that hurt the very people these policies were supposed to help. Monica Navarro from that Foster's Freeze said something that haunts me. She said this isn't the first business to close, and there are already a few local businesses affected. She's right. And based on these numbers, there will be more. This isn't just about hamburgers. This is about the future of work in America and what happens when good intentions meet economic